Welcome back. These are just my reading glasses. They're not prescription. Dollar store. We're back at it with the Hobbit. They have just left the Misty Mountains, but Gandalf, but along with the good also comes something else unexpected. So Gandalf said, well, this is really as farther than I intended to come with you. And so sometimes I think about that with some good news, there's always something that's not so great, but you keep going on. So they are at the Karok, because that is what the person who made the place calls it. And Gandalf doesn't really give them a name except to say, Bilbo asked him, why is it called the Karok? And he said, because that's the name he gave it. But he keeps using pronouns, saying he. And so Bilbo was like, well, who calls it that? And he says, the somebody I spoke of. This is on page 118. But he's kind of a bad-tempered person if you get on his bad side. He's a skin changer. Okay. So I'm at the bottom of page 118. And it says, at any rate, he is under no enchantment but his own. So there's no spells on him. He lives in an oak wood and has a great wooden house. And as a man, he keeps cattle and horses, which are nearly as marvelous as himself. They work for him and talk to him. He does not eat them. Neither does he hunt or eat wild animals. He keeps hives and hives of great fierce bees, and lives most on cream and honey. As a bear, he ranges far and wide. I once saw him sitting all alone on the top of the Karok at night, watching the moon sinking towards the Misty Mountains, and I heard him growl in the tongue of bears. The day will come when they will perish, and I shall go back. That is why I believe he once came from the mountains himself. Bilbo and the dwarves had now plenty to think about, and they asked no more questions. They still had a long way to walk before them, up slope and down dale, and they plodded. It grew hot. Sometimes they rested under the trees, and then Bilbo felt so hungry that he would have eaten acorns, if any had been ripe enough yet to have fallen to the ground. It was the middle of the afternoon before they noticed the great patches of flowers had begun to spring up, all the same kinds growing together as if they had been planted. Especially there was clover, waving patches of coxcomb clover and purple clover, and wide stretches of short, white, sweet, honey-smelling clover. There was a buzzing and a whirring and a droning in the air. Bees were busy everywhere, and such bees. Bilbo had never seen anything like them. If one was to sting me, he thought, I should swell up as big again as I am. They were bigger than hornets. The drones were bigger than your thumb. A good deal, and the bands of yellow on their deep black bodies shone like fiery gold. We are getting near, said Gandalf. We are on the edge of his bee pastures. After a while, they came to a belt of tall and very ancient oaks, and beyond these to a high thorn hedge through which you could neither see nor scramble. Makes me think of a field that's been cultivated. So there's a bunch of green grass, like a meadow underneath the oaks, and then bunches of flowers, not really flower beds, but just like spread by squirrels or by people. So you plant a patch of clover. I think of daffodils, but bees don't like daffodils. After a while, they came to, the hedge, which you could neither see nor scramble. So now I'm on page 120. You had better wait here, said the wizard to the dwarves, and when I call or whistle, begin to come after me. You will see the way I go. but only in pairs. Mind, about 5 minutes between each pair of you. Bombor is fattest and will do for 2. He had better come alone and last. Come on, Mr. Baggins. There is a gate somewhere round this way. And with that he went off along the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him. They soon came to a wooden gate, high and broad, beyond which they could see gardens and a cluster of low wooden buildings, some thatched and some made of unshaped logs, barns, stables, sheds, and a long, low wooden house. Inside, on the southward side of the great hedge, were rows and rows of hives with bell-shaped tops made of straw. The noise of the giant bees flying to and fro and crawling in and out filled all the air. The wizard and the hobbit pushed open the heavy creaking gate and went down a wide track towards the house. Some horses, very sleek and well-groomed, trotted up across the grass and looked at them intently with very intelligent faces. And then off they galloped to the buildings. They have gone to tell him of the arrival of strangers, said Gandalf. Soon they reached a courtyard, 3 walls of which were formed by the wooden house and its 2 long wings. In the middle there was lying a great oak trunk with many loped branches beside it. Standing near was a huge man with a thick black beard and hair and great bare arms and legs with knotted muscles. He was clothed in a tunic of wool down to his knees and was leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing by him with their noses at his shoulder. "Ugh, here they are," he said to the horses. "They don't look dangerous. You can be off." He laughed a great rolling laugh, put down his axe, and came forward. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he asked gruffly, standing in front of them and towering tall above Gandalf. As for Bilbo, he could easily have trotted through his legs without ducking his head to miss the fringe of the man's brown tunic. "I am Gandalf," said the wizard. "Never heard of him," growled the man. "And what's this little fellow?" he said, stooping down to frown at the hobbit with his bushy eyebrows. "That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit of good family and unimpeachable reputation," said Gandalf. Bilbo bowed. He had no hat to take off and was painfully conscious of his many missing buttons. So people like to present themselves respectfully. "I am a wizard," continued Gandalf. "I have heard of you, if you have not heard of me. But perhaps you have heard of my good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood. Yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go, I believe. I used to see him now and again," said Beorn. I guess his name is Beorn. Beorn. "Well, now I know who you are, or who you say you are. What do you want?" "To tell you the truth, we have lost our luggage and nearly lost our way, and are rather in need of help, or at least advice." That's a good way to approach people. I might need some help, but if you can't manage that, some advice is greatly always appreciated. I may say, whether or not you take it or leave it. I may say, we have had rather a bad time with goblins in the mountains. "Goblins?" said the big man less gruffly. "Oh ho, so you've been having trouble with them, have you? What did you go near them for?" Them is emphasized. "We did not mean to. They surprised us at night in a pass which we had to cross. We were coming out of the lands over west into these countries. It is a long tale." "Then you had better come inside and tell me some of it, if it won't take all day." That's a good way, if you're a person who needs to set boundaries, even in your own life today, is to offer to listen to people, but to put a time limit on it. You can come and tell me the story. I have a few minutes, I have an hour, or if it won't take all day, said the man, leading the way through a dark door that opened out of the courtyard into the house. Following him, they found themselves in a wide hall with a fireplace in the middle. Though it was summer, there was a wood fire burning, and the smoke was rising to the blackened rafters in search of the way out through an opening in the roof. They passed through this dim hall, lit only by the fire and the hole above it, and came through another, smaller door in a sort of veranda, propped on wooden posts made of single tree trunks. I can't quite get a good image of the house, except that it has like a big layout living area with a fireplace, and then you go off into the smaller rooms of the house, this outside. It faced south and was still warm and filled with the light of the westering sun, which slanted into it and fell golden on the garden full of flowers that came right up to the steps. Here they sat on wooden benches while Gandalf began his tale, and Bilbo swung his dangling legs and looked at the flowers in the garden, wondering what their names could be, as he had never seen half of them before. "I was coming over the mountains with a friend or two," said the wizard. "Or two. I can only see one, and a little one at that," said Beorn. "Well, to tell you the truth, I did not like to bother you with a lot of us until I found out if you were busy. I will give a call, if I may." It's good to have manners when you're entering someone else's home. "Go on, call away." So Gandalf gave a long, shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dori came round the house by the garden and stood bowing low before them. "1 or 3 you meant, I see," said Beorn. "But these aren't hobbits, they are dwarves." "Thorin Oakenshield at your service." "Dori at your service," said the 2 dwarves, bowing again. "I don't need your service, thank you," said Beorn, "but I expect you need mine. I am not over fond of dwarves, but if it is true you are Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thororor, I believe, and that your companion is respectable, and that you are enemies of goblins and are not up to any mischief in my lands." "What are you up to, by the way?" "They are on their way to visit the land of their fathers, away east beyond Mirkwood," put in Gandalf. I really like this guy, Beorn. He's to the point, and he sets boundaries, and he says it like it is. I don't need your service, but I suspect you might need mine. That's a great phrase to keep for yourself. Relatable. That would be, if I was underlining that green, I would underline that phrase on page 122. But he's not mean or rude about it. And when you're completely honest and upfront with people, then they tend to understand that there is a boundary there. Okay. Okay, so they're on their way to visit the land of their fathers. And it is entirely an accident that we are in your lands at all. We were crossing by the high pass that should have brought us to the road that lies to the south of your country, when we were attacked by the evil goblins, as I was about to tell you. "Go on telling then," said Beorn, who was never very polite. I consider it honest. "There was a terrible storm. The stone giants were out hurling rocks, and at the head of the pass we took refuge in a cave, the Hobbit and I and several of our companions." "Do you call 2 several?" "Well, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than 2. "Where are they? Killed? Eaten? Gone home?" "Well, no. They don't seem all to have come when I whistled. Shy, I expect. You see, we are very much afraid that we are rather a lot for you to entertain. Go on. Whistle again. I am in for a party, it seems, and one or two more won't make much difference, growled Bjorn. Gandalf whistled again, but Nori and Ori were there almost before he had stopped. For, if you remember, Gandalf had told them to come in pairs every 5 minutes. Hello, said Bjorn. You came pretty quick. Where were you hiding? Come on, my jack-in-the-boxes. Nori at your service. Ori at, they began, but Bjorn interrupted them. Thank you. When I want your help, I will ask for it. Sit down and let's get on with this tale, or it will be supper time before it is ended. As soon as we were asleep, went on Gandalf, a crack at the back of the cave opened. Goblins came out and grabbed the Hobbit and the dwarves and our troop of ponies. Troop of ponies? What were you, a traveling circus? Or were you carrying lots of goods? Or do you always call 6 a troop? Oh, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than 6 ponies, for there were more than 6 of us. And well, here are 2 more. Just at that moment, Balin and Dwalin appeared and bowed so low that their beards swept the stone floor. The big man was frowning at first, but they did their very best to be frighteningly polite, and kept on nodding and bending and bowing and waving their hoods before their knees in proper dwarf fashion, till he stopped frowning and burst into a chuckling laugh. They looked so comical. Troop was right, he said, a fine comic one. Come in, my merry men, and what are your names? I don't want your service just now, only your names, and then sit down and stop wagging. Balin and Dwalin, they said, not daring to be offended, and sat flop on the floor looking rather surprised. Now go on again, said Bjorn to the wizard. Where was I? Oh yes, I was not grabbed. I killed a goblin or 2 with a flash. Good, growled Bjorn. It is some good being a wizard then. And slipped inside the crack before it closed. I followed down into the main hall, which was crowded with goblins. The great goblin was there with 30 or 40 armed guards. I thought to myself, even if they were not all chained together, what can a dozen do against so many? A dozen? That's the first time I've heard 8 called a dozen. Or have you still got more jacks that haven't yet come out of their boxes? Well, yes, there seem to be a couple more here now. Fili and Kili, I believe, said Gandalf, as these 2 now appeared and stood smiling and bowing. That's enough, said Bjorn. Sit down and be quiet. Now go on, Gandalf. So Gandalf went on with the tale until he came to the fight in the dark, the discovery of the lower gate, and their horror when they found that Mr. Baggins had been mislaid. We counted ourselves and found there was no Hobbit. There were only 14 of us left. 14! That's the first time I've heard 1 from 14. From 1 from 10 leave 14. You mean 9, or else you haven't told me yet all the names of your party. Well, of course you haven't seen Oin and Gloin yet, and bless me, here they are. I hope you will forgive them for bothering you. Oh, let 'em come. Hurry up. Come along, you 2, and sit down. But look here, Gandalf. Even now we have only got yourself and 10 dwarves, and the Hobbit that was lost. That only makes 11, plus 1 mislaid, and not 14, unless wizards count differently to other people. But please now get on with the tale. Bjorn did not show it more than he could help, but really he had begun to get very interested. It's all in how you present things, right? And Gandalf has presented this well, without bothering someone. You see, in the old days, he had known the very part of the mountains that Gandalf was describing. He nodded and growled when he heard of the hobbits' reappearance and of their scramble down the stone slide and of the wolf ring in the woods. When Gandalf came to their climbing into trees with the wolves all underneath, he got up and strode about and muttered, I wish I had been there. I would have given them more than fireworks. Well, said Gandalf, very glad to see that his tale was making a good impression. I did the best I could. There we were, with the wolves going mad underneath us, and the forest beginning to blaze in places. When the goblins came down from the hills and discovered us, they yelled with delight and sang songs, making fun of us. 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Good heavens, growled Bjorn. Don't pretend that goblins can't count. They can. 12 isn't 15, and they know it. And so do I. There were Bifur and Bofur as well. I haven't ventured to introduce them before, but here they are. In came Bifur and Bofur. And me, gasped Boromir, puffing up behind. He was fat, and also angry at being left till last. He refused to wait 5 minutes, and followed immediately after the other 2. Well, now there are 15 of you, and since goblins can count, I suppose that is all that there were up in the trees. Now perhaps we can finish this story without any more interruptions. Mr. Baggins saw then how clever Gandalf had been. The interruptions had really made Bjorn more interested in the story, and the story had kept him from sending the dwarves off at once like suspicious beggars. He never invited people into his house if he could help it. He had very few friends, and they lived a good way away. And he never invited more than a couple of these to his house at a time. Now he had got 15 strangers sitting in his porch. By the time the wizard had finished his tale and had told of the eagle's rescue and of how they had all been brought to the Karok, the sun had fallen behind the peaks of the Misty Mountains, and the shadows were long in Bjorn's garden. A very good tale, said he, the best I have heard for a long while. If all beggars could tell such a good one, they might find me kinder. You may be making it all up, of course, but you deserve a supper for the story all the same. Let's have something to eat. Yes, please, they all said together. Thank you very much. So I'm going to stop there because I've gone over time a little bit for page 126. I really like this new character, Bjorn, and how Gandalf has kind of politely bombarded his home. Good ending.